You may have heard the saying, knowledge is power, and reading is fundamental. We introduce you to a Houston couple who's empowering their community through literacy and using their bookstore as a resource when it comes to Black history. Let's take you to C.O.W.S Bookstore in 3rd Ward.
We've talked about communities not having access to things, but we don't talk about literacy deserts or knowledge deserts. And so there weren't any bookstores that were in 3rd Ward operating at the time that we opened up. And so it was like really awesome to be able to be a part of the resurgence of, meeting this knowledge desert and saying, we're right here by Yates, we're right here by TSU, we're right here by the CUNY homes, and we want to be a place where knowledge thrives, where folks can have access to books in an affordable manner. And so, yeah, to be next to an HBCU, absolutely a dream.
We read an article online that talked about the plight and death of the Black-owned bookstore in America. And at that time, there were about only 39 Black-owned bookstores in the entire United States. And that number was plummeting. And so we looked at each other and were like, hey, this is something we need to resist.
And then about September 2022, we were approached with the opportunity to open our physical location, which is where we are today. And a friend of ours gave us that opportunity and helped us as a small business and said, we're going to make rent affordable for you guys to move in because we think what you do is important. So we've been here since December 2022, rocking and rolling.
I started reading very early. I was raised by my mom and my great aunt and my great uncle. When my mom would go to work, they would read with me. So we had our collection of Funk and Wagners, encyclopedias, but they had this beautiful children's Bible that they bought for me. And so I was just like, wow. So to put my family's instillment of knowledge in me came together and just sort of sent me off on this journey.
Mine is a lot different. I was a late reader, and actually my mom was really nervous because I liked being read to and I liked stories, but what I would do is I would listen to my mom tell the story and then I would memorize it and I would be like, I'm reading. And then we got to 1st grade and my 1st grade teacher was like, yes, you don't know how to read. We are concerned. And so my mom was really nervous. In 2nd grade, I had to go into special education because I was not reading on level. Teachers worked really hard to get me up to it. And then after that, I was off to the races. And it was like, while I always had a fondness for books, I was a late reader and it was a struggle for me. But once people put books in my hand that I liked and I was reading about topics that I enjoyed, then I just could not be stopped.
We are champions for truth. So while the majority of our books are written by Black people and people of color, we do recognize that there are also truth tellers who are not Black.
First off, Black history is American history, which is why we're not just open in February, we're open all 12 months because it's important, not only in February, but throughout the year. And so what we want to do is be a place where folks can, as David said, seek truth, learn about history that might not be so readily available in other places, and really just be proud of the accomplishments of Black Americans. The Black-owned bookstore is coming back in Houston. We can always use more. There's more than enough room for many bookstores in this city. But we are excited that we're a part of a resurgence of Black literacy in the city. C.O.W.S Bookstore exists far beyond the walls of this building because we are of the community. We are here because of the community, and it's only our desire to be in the community working. And so our friends at Shape, constantly partnering with them, our friends at IMBA, we've got poetry nights, we've got children's story times, bilingual story times, all kinds of things going on, and just kind of always trying to engage with the community because we exist because of y'all. And I think for us as C.O.W.S Bookstore, it's a joy and a privilege to be able to continue to add to that history. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors who built this country and worked so hard, and so it's just our job and our responsibility to make them proud.
And Danielle Moore is here with some Black History Month reading recommendations. Reading is so much fun to do.
I have a good time with it. I don't know how everybody else feels, but
it just puts you in a different place.
It does. Mentally, I did the American Health Association's talk on how reading is helpful to mental health and how it does calm you down and help control those thoughts.
Yeah, and February is a good time because not only is it Black History Month, but it's not great outside, but you can really learn things that you haven't learned. Because Black history is American history.
It is American history, and
yes.
there's a lot that people don't know, which is ridiculous considering, you know, it's easy to find.
Exactly. It's everywhere. Okay, let's start off with one of your first books that you recommend. It's by Common. It's kind of new, and it's called And Then We Rise.
And Then We Rise. Common, this book just dropped last week. Okay, this is Common. Everybody, it's Chicago. Y'all know who Common is. But we had his event with the public library this week. It's Black Men and Self-Care. A lot of times when we talk about self-care, we don't talk enough about how Black men can experience it. We're talking about baths and candles, and for Black men it looks a little different. It's really taking care of yourself so you can take care of your community, and Common is great at taking care of his community.
This is true.
This book is really, really good.
Now, let's go back in time, because you don't have to read a book that just came out.
No!
Let's talk about the author and civil rights icon, James Baldwin.
Now that man.
Exactly.
That man.
Exactly.
So he has so many great books, but there are books that cover his essays. There are books that cover his talks, and his talks are so poignant and well researched and presented so beautifully. So any James Baldwin book, but especially books that are focusing on his essays, are a good way to go.
And you can learn so much about him and the time he lived in, and find out how it hasn't changed that much.
It hasn't changed at all. In fact, it's gone a little backwards, and that's fun.
Right. right. Talk about Bettina Love's book.
Okay, so Bettina Love is this educator. She is a PhD educator, and she wrote a book called Punished for Dreaming that talks about how Black students found themselves in the position that they're currently in. School, public school especially, is not helpful to Black students right now, and how did we get here? And it started when we put all the students together, and it created an unsafe situation, and it's gotten increasingly unsafe from there. So it kind of tells us how we got into this situation and how to kind of back out of it.
Okay, let's go back in time again. Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora, hitting a straight lick. Zora Neale Hurston is my favorite. I'm a Florida girl.
Okay.
We love Zora.
Okay.
And she writes as herself. She shows up as herself, and she uses Black language colloquialism like no one else. And so she doesn't give you a way to understand her writing or her conversation. She says you got to figure it out, and you do.
All right.
The story's good.
Let's talk about money. Arlen Hamilton.
Arlen Hamilton, we have an event with her next month, and it's talking about she wants to create a bunch of Black millionaires. How do you do it? How do you build your company? How do you create yourself in a way where we're going to have a whole lot of Black millionaires out here?
And then Kwame Alexander has a book on poetry.
Poetry! We love poetry. Poetry is what so many people connect to, and Kwame is great at bringing together a bunch of poets and talking about how life feels, because feelings are important.
That's right. And Kylie Reed.
Kylie Reed, come and get it. It's GMA's Book of the Month pick.
It?
It is.
Oh, wow.
And she is all over the place. It just dropped, and it is a great book. It's college, it's messiness, it's everything that has happened.
Is it a novel? Or?
Yes, it is. It's a novel. Yeah, it's messy.
What about the dead? What about the dead don't need reminding?
The dead don't need reminding. Julian Randle, he is a Chicago poet, and this book is dropping, and I can't wait. The cover is beautiful, as everyone can see, but he's just smart. He's a poet, he's a professor, he's everything good in the world, and he needs our support with that coming up.
And Love Songs for Ricky.
Yes.
I
love books. I'm not a romance girl.
Okay.
I'm not a romance girl, but if I'm going to read romance, I want to read something about a real relationship and how it comes together with two real people who are living their best lives and want to figure out how to live those lives together. So that one is coming soon, too.
And Children of Anguish and Anarchy.
Oh, now this is the follow-up from Children of Blood and Bone series by Tomi Adeyemi. And so there are two books out right now, so go ahead and catch up, because when this one comes out, you will not be able to find it.
Yeah, these sound like great book club books,
yeah,
too.
these are all book club vibes, all things that are going to get people excited about reading again, hopefully.
Have you read all of them?
Yes!
Oh, my goodness. How quickly
typically to read a book for you?
Typically, give me 2 hours for about 350 pages. I'm running through it.
And you can read more than one in a day?
Yeah, I have to.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. You can find all these books at Bookstore and Gallery, now on the city's north side at 515 North Halsted, or you can also visit shy.com, right?
Yes, you
Thank
can.
you. Happy reading.
Happy reading.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, February 27, 2026. So I have been told. This is our second installment on the late Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles' dissertation, not book, again, first time not reading or reading a non-book for the book club. His dissertation, Pan-African Sites of Resistance, Black Bookstores, and the Struggle to Represent Black Identity. We're picking up on Chapter 2. We did a pretty good job. We concluded right at the end of Chapter 1 last week, so hopefully we can get nice, clean breaks as we move through this work. The two reports that we heard at the beginning today, the first, these are both Black Bookstores. One in Houston, Class Bookstore, 3rd Ward in Houston, and then Semicolon Bookstore, and that's in Chicago. Roy Ayers in the background. With Class Bookstore in Houston, I thought it was great. We heard the proprietors talking about one, that they wanted to establish a bookstore in 3rd Ward Houston because they called it a literacy desert, and that there had not been a physical bookstore in that location for a long time, and that they wanted to be a part of bringing books back to Black Houstonians, right? Fantastic applause there. And that they talked about their experience of reading. Both of them talked about their experience reading books growing up, and the impact of, one, having people read to them, and having this something that, you know, people model, and this is fun, and activity that we engage in on a regular basis. Reading with your child, and reading books about racism. Then with Miss Danielle Moore in Chicago, she was on WGN. Oh, and really quick, they talked about, with Class Books and Bookstore in Houston, they talked about how the property manager made their rent affordable to support their counter-racist literacy effort to bring books to Black people. They're like, wow, now how many Black bookstores get that sort of hookup? Applause again. Anyway, I wonder if it was a Black property manager who, you know. Anyway, the Class Bookstore, now that one is in, Semicolon Bookstore, that is in Chicago. Class Bookstore in Houston. Semicolon Bookstore with Miss Danielle Moore. She kind of gave her book list, and this was during Black History Month, not 2026, but not that long ago. And she gave her book list. I will say, one, I'm very thankful that we did not get all of the same books that have been on many of the other book lists that I've seen for Black people, and we got more current books. Wonders never cease. Thank goodness for Miss Danielle Moore. Certainly, reading nonfiction has been my emphasis. There were a lot of fiction and poetry books on the list. I will highlight, she did, thankfully, Miss Moore gave us a number of non-fiction books about racism, like Punished for Dreaming, How School Reform Harms Black Children and How We Heal, Bonita Love. The Dead Don't Need Reminding by Julian Randall. And then Your First Million, Why You Don't Have to Be Born into a Legacy of Wealth to Leave one behind. She got at least 3 nonfiction works on her list of reading. So bravo. Oh, reading nonfiction more important than watching television. That book about the first million, I did say that, man, for black people particularly, and what reminded me of it is the attacks on black bookstores. Sometimes it comes through the form of taxes. You can get that million or billion. The IRS is coming in because, hey, I'm about to read nonfiction. We did just have Calvin Schermerhorn as a guest on our broadcast last year, and he wrote a book, The Plunder of Black Wealth. And when he was with us as a guest, he talked, and that book was published last year, he talked explicitly about how white people have gotten refined at stealing the monies, the few little nickels that they allow us to have on the plantation. So you can get that money, maybe. The evidence shows white people do a pretty good job of taking it back. In short order often. Any kudos. We will get back to Pan-African sites of resistance. The great, the late, unfortunately, Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, and even keeping in mind that he did commit suicide before he was even 40 years old. What a loss. Maybe even, just keeping that in mind as we study this work and try to learn. We will get to it. Pan-African Sites of Resistance. Katherine Massey Book Club, audio segment 1.
Chapter 2. Problem and Methods of Study. The Orienting Framework and Hypotheses Dimensions. To facilitate the research process, I utilized an orienting framework in the initial stages of research and refined this framework as the research progresses. The orienting framework, an interrelated grouping of hypotheses dimension, was based on the following: the theoretical work of Omni and Winant, the empirical work of Joyce's, Hopkins, Kirschenbaum, and Eastland, and the historical work of Morris, Churchill and Wall, Martin, Asante, and Carson. As qualitative research requires flexibility in approach, the 4 hypotheses dimensions comprising the orienting framework are expected to be modified as the data becomes collected. Indeed, some were discarded altogether as new hypotheses dimensions were generated, subsequently changing the present framework. Thus stated, the following 4 hypotheses dimensions were put forth. They attempt to reference the external and internal levels, the integration of the macro and micro levels, as well as local and international levels of analysis. Hypothesis Dimension 1. Coupling Omni and Winant's theoretical concept of sites of resistance with the empirical work on bookstores. I hypothesize that institutions such as Pan-African bookstores historically have been sites of resistance, engaged in a discursive power struggle with white mainstream institutions over the representation of black identity. This should be witnessed at both internal and external levels. 1A. Internal level. 1. Macro aspect. The routine bookstore operations and the materials contained within are constituted by a political struggle against white racist discourse. For example, the books and other store materials comprising the store are black or African in nature, while focus on the struggle to represent black identity. The store members conceptualize the shop as both an enactment and producer of black African identity. The store functions as an ideological enactment of black identity. 2. Micro aspects. The daily interpersonal staff customer interactions should be oriented to and constituted by the struggle to represent black identity. 1B. External level. The bookstores were regarded as political and social entities by members, with the main combatant being those endorsing the white European social system. The bookstore is regarded as a political site by non-members. As such, the store struggles against the repressive tactics of the mainstream, such as verbal abuse, bomb threats, exclusion from mainstream bookstore associations and functions, redlining tactics, and harassment from the local state and federal government institutions, in essence, the police and FBI. 2. While the business was considered political by the members, the community it served was perceived to be non-political or unconscious. Hypothesis Dimension 2. I hypothesize that differences in other dimensions of identity, in other words, class, nationality, gender, religion, will lead to internal power struggles concerning the store's presentation of black identity and the production of many sites of resistance. A. Differences in identity dimensions present among bookstore staff members and customers will cause struggles within the store. B. Moreover, differences in identity between the bookstore's staff and patrons will cause many struggles between them. Those in disagreement with the shop's conceptualization or enactment of black identity will produce their own sites of resistance or become members of other institutional sites of resistance. Hypothesis Dimension 3. I hypothesize that an international web of Pan-African resistance is formed by links between these sites of resistance in different local, national, and international areas. A. Macro level. 1. Similarity in store structure and material content. This occurs via inter-bookstore communications occurring throughout the diaspora pertaining to information and exchange of bookstore items and bookstore organization. B. Micro level. This occurs via interactions between travelers and store members at the oral level of discourse. Store members bring information, books, and new ideas about black identity to the store, which are discussed by patrons. C. Because of the above, the sense of belonging to an international Pan-African family will be constructed as a major theme in the store. Hypothesis Dimension 4. Following Morris and others, I hypothesize that the themes evident in the store material and shop member interactions are historically rooted. As such, the bookstore's presentation of black identity will be linked to previous black social movements. A. The salience a movement has at a store will be a reflection of the interaction between the store's particular national, regional, and local context and the identities of the individual store members. Procedure and methodology. In this section, I will review the specific procedures and methods applied in my research. We begin first with a general discussion of qualitative and quantitative procedures. Qualitative versus quantitative approaches. Corbett and Strauss define qualitative research as a non-mathematical procedure. Any kind of research that produces findings not arrived at by means of statistical procedures or other means of quantification. Usually, the focus of qualitative research is assessing the subject's perspective. This is considered a paramount task, and most qualitative researchers endorse the basic commitment to convey the subjective realities of those studied. Thomas succinctly states the assumption buttresses this commitment. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Given the above, qualitative research is generally performed when research is exploratory or descriptive and stresses the importance of context, setting, and subjects, frame of reference. Below, Rossman and Corbett and Strauss provide examples of when qualitative procedures are best utilized. 1. Research to uncover the nature of persons' experiences with a phenomena. 2. Research that delves in depth into complexities and processes. 3. Research for which relevant variables have yet to be defined or when research is needed to gain novel and fresh slants about topics which quite a bit is already known. 4. Research on informal and unstructured linkages and processes in organizations. 5. Research on real as opposed to stated goals. 6. Research that seeks to explore why policy, folk wisdom, and practice do not work. 7. Research that cannot be done experimentally for practical or ethical reasons, or when research is needed on the intricate details of phenomena are needed that are difficult to convey with quantitative methods. Given the above general description of the qualitative approach, we turn now to discuss procedures often employed in reference to sampling, verification, and overall research soundness. Sampling procedures. My sampling strategy will fall under the qualitative methodology and will thus differ from quantitative strategies in a number of ways. Patton states that qualitative inquiry typically focuses in depth on relatively small samples, even single cases selected purposefully. Quantitative methods typically depend on larger samples selected randomly. This is due to the fact that the aim of the two methods differ. Qualitative methods aim for information richness, while quantitative methods strive for representativeness. The impetus for qualitative sampling is the need to illuminate questions under study and to increase the scope and range of data exposed, to uncover multiple realities. Site selection. Rossman states that in qualitative research, the research questions are the primary guide to site selection. Additionally, Rossman lists 4 criteria for selecting the ideal sample site. 1. Entry is possible. 2. There is a high probability that a rich mix of many of the processes, people, programs, interactions, and/or structures that may be a part of the research question will be present. 3. The researcher can devise an appropriate role to maintain continuity of presence for as long as necessary. 4. Data quality and credibility of the study are reasonably assured by avoiding poor sampling decisions. How the sites I have chosen specifically fulfill the above criteria is detailed below in the methodology section. Sampling within the site, the mapping tour, selective sampling, and snowball sampling. Once at the site, Schatzman and Strauss suggest that an initial mapping tour of the site be performed. The mapping tour is a first reliable and extensive look at the things, persons, and activities that constitute a site. This will be accomplished by making an initial tour through the site using one of the staff as a guide through the shop, inspecting schedules of staff, routines, and special meetings, and making drawings of the internal and external physical layout of the site. 3 types of maps will be constructed from the mapping tour, in which one constructs social, spatial, and temporal maps of the site. Social maps refer to numbers and varieties of persons or person, their hierarchical arrangements, divisions of labor. Spatial maps refer to the spatial location of persons, equipment, specialized centers of work and control, areas and corridors along which pass goods, people, and services. Temporal maps contain data bearing upon the ebb and flow of people, goods, services, and communications, and the timing of special assemblies, rituals, and routines that characterize the site. The purpose of constructing these maps at the outset is so that the researcher may gain an initial insight into the population and universe comprising the site. Moreover, while an understanding of the whole is obviously premature, the mapping tour leads to some initial theoretical leads or mini hypotheses. After the mapping tour, the next step is to perform selective sampling of the research setting. Selective sampling is when selective observations are performed at selected subsites within the site. Since everything cannot be observed, these selected observations will be based on the data derived from the mapping tour, the orienting framework, and any restrictions placed upon observations by the host. As such, each site's events, rituals, resources, and interactions will be selectively observed. These selected observations will give a general picture of how the researcher's initial framework fits the setting. Given this general picture, one is now prepared to start sampling informants and question them in terms of the developing theory. While many forms of qualitative sampling exist, all depend on the theoretical need of the study. Patton discusses 16 different types of purposive sampling. One of those types, snowball sampling, has been demonstrated as an effective strategy for gathering rich information. In snowball sampling, subjects are identified by people who know what cases are information rich. Thus stated, after this initial mapping tour and selective sampling, I intend to use snowball sampling to generate a chain of informants who will be pertinent to the emerging theory. This will allow me to extend the richness of the data as well as provide a measure of cross-validation for final verification. Open, relational, and theoretical sampling. Within the above sampling procedures, Corbin and Strauss suggest that a three-step sampling system be employed. Open, relational, and theoretical sampling. The first step performed during and subsequent to the initial mapping tour is open sampling. Here, the aim is to discover as many potentially relevant categories as possible along with their properties and dimensions. This phase generates initial categories, dimensions, and hypotheses vis-a-vis the mapping tour. This is followed by relational or variational sampling. The aim here is to uncover and validate the initial hypothesis generated from the open sampling phase. This is done by searching for as many differences as possible at the dimensional, categorical level. In other words, work shifts, staff demographics, restricted areas, shelf content, etc., and relating them to the initial framework. Finally, the researcher engages in theoretical sampling, sampling on the basis of concepts that have proven theoretical relevance to the evolving theory. Here, the aim is to test relationships between dimensions or categories by directed and deliberate sampling. The researcher chooses sites, persons, and documents that will maximize the storyline, relationships between categories, and poorly developed categories. Verification, testing statements against data. The primary belief, especially in ethnographic forms of qualitative research, is that a necessary step for claiming credibility, validity, is via immersion, proximity, or at least some sort of social, psychological intimacy with the subjects. However, while deemed necessary, it is not sufficient. Other verification procedures are required. The additionally qualitative procedure for verification used in this study will be one in which testing of the hypotheses is built into every step of the research process. In general, the procedure is to collect data, generate hypotheses, compare the hypotheses against data, make modifications, and or generate new hypotheses, and then return to the field to test again. As such, the research data collection and analysis proceed simultaneously and continuously throughout the entire research period. Moreover, the researcher searches not only for supporting cases, but negative cases. Negative cases do not necessarily negate hypotheses. More likely, they suggest differences and variations which need to be accounted for in order to add depth and modification to the developing theory. Verification of theoretical propositions developed in the study will be performed via 3 cross-validation strategies. 1. Propositions will be checked against A, the collected data, or against B, novel data obtained by re-entering the field. 2. Discriminate sampling will be performed whereby the researcher chooses sites, persons, and documents that will maximize opportunities for verifying the emerging theoretical dimensions. As such, I will go back to the site, people, documents, or go to new ones in order to gather the confirmatory data needed. 3. Finally, propositions can be compared to literature published on similar research. For example, I can compare my theoretical propositions against the findings published in Eastland's work. Qualitative versus quantitative standards of research soundness. Below, I compare qualitative and quantitative criteria of research soundness. Traditional notions of internal and external validity, replicability, objectivity, and reactivity are addressed. Credibility versus internal validity. In traditional social science research, internal validation refers to the extent the research design permit us to reach causal conclusions about the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. This an attempt to assess how true a study actually is. In qualitative research, the goal is credibility, i.e., to demonstrate that the inquiry was conducted in such a manner as to ensure that the subject was accurately identified and described. Simply stated, the way the researcher demonstrates that his work has validity, i.e., is credible, to the persons in the research context is by referring to the researcher's data. An in-depth description showing the complexities of variables and interactions will be so embedded with data from the setting that it cannot help but be valid. Transferability, generalizability versus external validity. In traditional social science, external validity refers to how well the findings of the experiment apply to situations not tested directly. In qualitative research, this can be considered a question of research transferability or generalizability, and is admittedly problematic. However, Rossman suggests that triangulation via multiple research sites and multiple data sources is a viable solution. Triangulation, the act of bringing more than one source of data to bear on a single point. Data from different sources can be used to corroborate, elaborate, or illuminate the research in question, designing a study in which multiple cases are used, multiple informants, or more than one data gathering technique can greatly strengthen the study's usefulness or other setting. The present study incorporates triangulation by A, using multiple data collection techniques, ethnography, oral history, and audio-visual film, and B, using multi-site analyses comparing data from 2 research sites. Multi-site triangulation is also supported by Rossman et al., who advocate using cross-site analyses that identify major patterns. This approach recognizes both the need to inform policymakers and the importance of local variations that cannot be explored unless the cases are compared. Thus, while preserving holistic data from specific sites, it is important to conduct more general comparative analyses. Dependability versus replicability. In general, when performing qualitative research, one does not pretend to be replicable because of the following assumption. We assume that qualitative research by its very nature cannot be replicated because the real world changes. Alternatively, traditional positivists assume an unchanging universe where inquiry could, quite logically, be replicated. Thus, to respond to traditional concerns of social science, it is suggested that qualitative researchers take the following steps to ensure dependability. A. The researcher should keep thorough notes and a researcher's diary that records each research design and the rationale behind it. B. The researcher should keep all data in a well-organized, retrievable form so that researchers can make them available easily if the findings are challenged or if another researcher wants to reanalyze the data. Confirmability versus objectivity. The traditional notion of objectivity is concerned that the natural subjectivity of the researcher will shape the research and lead to bias in interpretation. Qualitative researchers assume that total objectivity is impossible. Moreover, controlling subjectivity may not even be desirable. Indeed, the researcher's subjectivity is assumed to be theoretically relevant. Given this, as opposed to striving for objectivity, qualitative researchers strive for confirmability. Can the findings of the research be confirmed by another? This aim effectively removes the burden of proof from some inherent characteristic of the researcher, objectivity, and places it squarely on the data themselves. However, in order to respond to traditional concerns, Rossman suggests the following. A. A constant search for negative cases. B. Checking and rechecking the data and purposeful testing of rival hypotheses. C. Practicing value-free note-taking, then taking two sets of notes, one with strictly objective observations and another that allows the researcher to impose some conceptual scheme or metaphor, and to be creative with the data in ways that prove useful for formal analysis. D. Devising tests to check the analysis and applying those tests to the data, asking questions of the data. Reactivity, sensitivity versus controlling. The notion of subject reactivity refers to the fact that researchers' presence will produce reactions in the subject, thus changing the naturalness of the subject's context. Traditionally, these reactive effects are considered biases in the research. Indeed, in quantitative research, the attempt is to control this reactivity. However, given the interactive nature of qualitative research, the aim is for the qualitative researcher to be sensitive to reactivity and incorporate both subject and researcher reactivity into the analysis. Solutions to reactivity thus lie not in restricting, cutting off, or regularizing field interactions, but in trying to become sensitive to and perceptive of how one is perceived and treated by others. The researcher is viewed as a source for the results, not as a containment of it. Oral history, ethnographic, and audiovisual procedures. This research falls into line with previous social science studies which have attempted to understand the Black diaspora community via qualitative methods, oral history and formal interviews, ethnography, textual analyses, and audio recordings, and more eclectic methods. While not all qualitative approaches are the same, my research utilized standard approaches outlined from three traditions: oral history, as taught by the UCLA Department of Oral History; ethnography from the symbolic interactionist field; and audiovisual research strategies from naturalistic sociology. In combination, these techniques will allow me to triangulate the research. In other words, the act of bringing more than one source of data to bear on a single point. Oral history. In terms of the oral history component, Morris states that most of the history of Black life has been written and interpreted by elites. In America in particular, it is commonplace for elite whites to control the written word when it comes to interpreting the experiences of African Americans. I intend to break from this tradition and follow the path blazed by the oral historians cited above. This method follows a basic qualitative approach which attempts to alleviate researcher bias from intruding upon the data as much as possible. Strauss and Corbin comment on this approach. The researcher's task is to gather the data and present them in such a manner that the informants speak for themselves. The aim is to give an honest account with little or no interpretation of, interference with, those spoken words of, or the observations made by the researcher. Thus stated, I utilized oral history interviews in order to document the bookstore members' own interpretation of their history. Oral history were collected according to the guidelines set by the Oral History Association and UCLA's Oral History Program. As such, in order to prepare for the interviews, I conducted background library research on printed materials and archival documents, letters, newspapers, articles will be investigated. Primary libraries were the Schomburg Research Center in Black Culture in Harlem, New York, the Moreland Spingarn Archive Center in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles Public Library, Inglewood Branch, UCLA Undergraduate Research Library, UCLA Powell Library, UCLA Oral History Program Library, University of the West Indies Mona Campus Main Library, West Indies Collection, the University of the West Indies Mona Campus, Oral History Collection Library. In England, the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton, the Warwick Center for Race and Ethnic Relations, Goldsmith College Library. Following this, informal interviews with potential staff and customers were undertaken so as to A. provide an initial base for the formal interviews, and B. to act as verification checks on the printed literature. After gathering this background material, the information was related to the orienting framework. This background information formed the core for the development of the formal oral histories questionnaires. See Appendix 6. Oral history interviews were performed in both group and one-on-one sessions. While the questionnaire was used as an overall guide to assure topics were covered, the questions were asked in an open-ended format to allow freedom of response and to ensure against researcher bias and rigidity in the questions. As such, the actual interview format flowed more like a conversation than a formal structured interview. Rossman comments on the fundamental qualitative assumption: the member's perspective is paramount, which guides this approach to questioning. The researcher explores a few general topics to help uncover the participant's meaning, perspective, but otherwise respects how the participant frames and structures the responses. This, in fact, is an assumption fundamental to qualitative research. The participant's perspective on the social phenomenon of interest should unfold as the participant views it, not as the researcher views it. The final oral history questionnaire was also used as the basis for a survey instrument. 100 surveys were personally handed out to attenders of the American Bookseller Association Black Booksellers meeting in August 1994 in the hopes of enhancing the return ratio. Moreover, 10 were mailed out to black bookshops in England and 2 were sent to black bookshops in Jamaica, also during August of 1994. Follow-up calls were made 1 month later. Only 8 were returned, however, all from the U.S. sample. The results are discussed in the contemporary data section. Ethnography. In order to cross-validate the historical dynamics as well as get at members' meanings during contemporary bookstore activity, ethnographic data was collected using the following observational procedures: passive participation, limited interaction, participant observation, interview techniques, eavesdropping, and situational conversation. People, events, store materials, and time frames were observed systematically in a routine fashion, and a record of the daily information was filed as field notes. This data was then categorized systematically for initial analysis purposes. Following initial analysis and refinements, I returned to the field to gather more field notes. This process of data gathering, analysis, and refinement was the primary strategy throughout the research. Audio-visual filming. Film can be quite useful in social sciences, has a long history as film ethnography, and is especially useful for the analysis of the preservation and study of data from non-recurring, disappearing, or rare events. Thus, I used film to record the spontaneous discussions and meetings occurring at bookshops, as well as filming the physical attributes of the store and patrons. Obviously, problems also exist when filming, such as making subjects feel uncomfortable. However, most believe that, if possible, the benefits for filming far outweigh the problems. As such, the only filming of oral history interviews and daily bookshop activity was done in Kingston, Jamaica, where I was allowed to videotape. Filming was performed using two types of film sampling techniques: programmed sampling and opportunity sampling. Once recorded, audio and video cassettes were cataloged, duplicated, and transcribed for analytic and archival purposes according to naturalistic methods. Unfortunately, in the U.S. and England, because of the political history of these bookstores, setting up a camera in the middle of the store to document daily activity, lectures, oral histories was received negatively by bookstore members. As such, these oral histories were audio taped. Triangulation. Finally, data from the film record was compared with the ethnographic field notes and notes taken during the oral history interview. Using these multiple data techniques in combination allowed me to triangulate the data. Triangulation of the data was quite useful, as it enabled me to enhance the richness of analysis by allowing me to corroborate, elaborate, and illuminate the research in question. Moreover, it increased the transferability of the findings as discussed above. Methodology. Theoretical concepts. Pan-African sites of resistance. A. Institutional sites of resistance. I first encountered the term sites of resistance when I read the title of one of Bell Hook's chapters, Home Place, a Site of Resistance, and she has used it repeatedly in other chapters and other works. She discusses the Black family home place as a specific site of resistance and gives suggestions as to what a site of resistance could be. Unfortunately, Hooks neither spells out in detail the conceptual criteria for a site of resistance, nor does she say where she got the term from. However, Gramsci's influence is quite conspicuous. Alternatively, Omni and Winant do theorize the conceptual criteria for sites, series of sites, and their resistance aspects. Again, the Gramsci influence is conspicuous. However, they do not use the term sites of resistance per se. As such, I employed the terminology Hooks utilizes, sites of resistance, since it seems to capture themes of resistance which resonate from Omni and Winant's description of institutional sites. However, I operationalize sites of resistance in terms of Omni and Winant's criteria, since Hooks' specific examples of sites of resistance, e.g. the Black home place, Black gazes, the safe place, would, as we shall see below, be subsumed by Omni and Winant's conceptualization. Following Omni and Winant, our notion of site was as follows. A site is a region of social life with a coherent set of constitutive social relations. The structure of the site, each site, may be characterized by a distinct set of rules of the game for participation in practices. Given the above, a racial site would be a site dependent upon race as the organizing principles or rules of the game. Moreover, a Pan-African or Black site of resistance would be a site in which Black identity serves as the organizing principle. These sites were characterized by 3 integrated levels. 1. At the macro level, social structure is conceptualized as a collectivity. More concretely, they suggest investigating an aggregate or series of sites in which race is a principal organizing factor. Second, at the micro level, interactions should exist among members concerning the formation of racial identity. Thus, within the sites, race is also a matter of individuality, of the formation of identity. The way in which we understand ourselves, interact with others, the structuring of our practical activity are all shaped by racial meanings and racial awareness. Third, the level of political struggle which permeates the other 2 levels. Indeed, the authors centered their theory on understanding the process of racial formation and pointed to the political contestation over racial meanings as the main dynamic in this process. Individuals, groups, institutions, and movements are moved, in our view, by the efforts of intellectuals to make new interpretations of racial meanings, to understand the meaning of race and racial identity in new ways. Once reinterpreted, rearticulated, disrupted, and space for political contestation is opened. Hooks and Mercer concretely specify this process of rearticulation by which marginalized subjects resist the dominant group's construction of their identity as the production of Black counter-hegemonic discourse. To elaborate briefly, Hooks said, and Mondimbe described, the white Western notions of identity as having hegemonic effects in society. In any society not totalitarian, then, certain cultural forms predominate over others. Just as certain ideas are more influential than others, this form of cultural leadership is what Gramsci has identified as hegemony. As such, the production of notions of identity which critique, are alternative, and or transform the white Western hegemonic notions are termed counter-hegemonic discourses by Hooks. Mercer also uses the term counter-hegemonic to describe the Afro-West Indies incorporation of negritude ideology. The West Indian saw the subordination of his French colonial masters at the hands of fellow Europeans, insofar as this undermined the natural authority of the other and the binary system of colonial racism in which it was based. It opened up the space for the dissemination of negritude as a counter-hegemonic ideology based on an imaginary and symbolic strategy of inversion and reversal that would revalorize elements of African origin that had been previously devalorized in relation to elements of European origin. Given the above, in this study, Pan-African sites of resistance will be those sites of resistance engaged in the production of counter-hegemonic discourse on Black identity. Within the site, the members' attempts to represent Black or Pan-African identity provides the rules of the game, structuring and ordering normal site functions and interactions. Pan-African bookstores. As stated, Omni and Winant's notion of a site, while allowing flexibility, could be considered a bit too general. The authors admit that their notion needs further theorization. Indeed, Omni and Winant's notion of a site of resistance could range anywhere from 3 young black men who meet regularly on a street corner and discuss identity to the territories occupied by the internationally based All-African Revolutionary Party. Given this large level of generality, I intend to narrow the definition for this study. Following cues from Morris's study, I will concentrate on sites which are A. established institutions and B. occupy a physical space. These additional qualifiers should also enhance Omni and Winant's notion of regularity, and bring to the notion of a site a spatial dimension such as territory. I have chosen Pan-African bookstores because of their absence in the literature and because they fit Omni and Winant's general notion of sites of resistance as well as these qualifications. In terms of the above, a bookstore which is a Pan-African site of resistance would be designated by the following 4 aspects. 1. A bookstore in which black identity functions as the rules of the game, providing a normative framework that guides the regularized bookstore activity, the physical space, location, and description of the store, the stocking, distribution, buying, selling of counter-hegemonic books and materials about black life, standardized work procedures followed by workers and owners, i.e. time schedules, wages, assigned responsibilities and duties, etc. 2. At the micro level, we should witness black identity constituting the daily actions and interactions which comprises the above standard business practices, conversations, nonverbal behavior, physical distances, etc. 3. The macro and micro levels should emerge in a reciprocal fashion, with the main dynamic being the political struggle to represent black identity. The ongoing bookstore-related interactions should continuously recreate the overall political structure. Reciprocally, the regularized, institutionalized political project should impinge on the daily life of the organization, framing the daily bookstore interactions. 4. The bookstore occupies a physical space which is constituted by the above 3 characteristics. Research site sample. Gilroy advocates moving beyond the dogmatic focus of national or nationalistic traditions commonly found in Euro-American cultural thought by suggesting that such approaches lead to an ethnic absolutism which fails to incorporate the cultural exchanges and transformations occurring between black communities, presently and historically. Alternatively, he suggests a transnational or diaspora conceptualization. Furthermore, within the transnational perspective, Gilroy suggests that we take the Atlantic as our unit of analysis. In this respect, we limited sample site selection to sites in countries bordering the Atlantic and whose black population has historic connections to the Atlantic triangular slave trade. Gilroy comments on the methodological importance of the Atlantic when investigating black identity. The history of the black Atlantic since then, continually crisscrossed by the movements of black people not only as commodities, but engaged in various struggles towards emancipation, autonomy, and citizenship, is a means to re-examine the problem of nationality, location, identity, and historical memory. Given Gilroy's suggestions, bookstores were selected from Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. Specifically, I attempted to verify and or modify the orienting framework by beginning the study by comparing qualitatively 3 black bookstores, one in Jamaica, one in the United States, and one in England. The 3 stores used in my study fit the above criteria. SO1 Bookstore in Los Angeles, California, and Books About Us in Kingston, Jamaica, Timbuktu Bookstore in London, England. These bookstores have the following in common. A. Places which have common institutional contexts, i.e., places primarily engaged in buying and selling books about Black or African life. B. Store owners perceive themselves as being engaged in a power struggle over the constitution of Black or African identity with mainstream white society. C. Periodically, customers and staff interactions involve discussions about Black identity. D. The stores lease buildings from which they operate their businesses.
Context of white supremacy. Katherine Massey Book Club will pick up. We're on page, for me, it is page 69. We're at the, I guess, subtitle, Initial Research Site Methods. That's where we will resume for audio segment 2. Folks have thoughts, observations to share. The number 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll see what folks have to, or what folks thought about the first chunk of our reading today. I will say quick, I told our narrator, who's done a great job, this is, again, our first time reading a dissertation for the book club. These are not generally intended for the general public. These are intended for, a small niche group of academic readers, So this is not going to be snappy romance, very different. And he's doing a serious study of these book clubs and lining out how he conducted that study. But that kind of last portion we heard at the end, where he talked about some of the specific bookstores that he's comparing, one in Jamaica, one in the United States, one in England, like, dang, the global aspect of this study, I think for 30 years ago, is very impressive, at least to me. It was like before 9/11 traveling, when I guess in some respects maybe it was a little easier. And in other respects maybe a little more challenging. No iPhone, no smartphone, all that good stuff. But man, looking at counter-racism in Black bookstores all over the world, wow, bravo, Dr. Beckles. And I was thinking too, obviously I've not been to London. I have been to Jamaica. Like, man, I would have checked while I was there. But are these, so we know about S1, just read about that in Char Adams. So Books About Us, that's in Jamaica, Kingston, does that still exist? I'm gonna have to check myself. Like, folks can, and then the one in the UK, make sure I got it. Timbuktu, that's it, it's on the other page. Timbuktu in London, does that still exist? Has there, or maybe he's going to tell, maybe I can shut up and just keep reading, but is it the same history like the Black bookstores, or many of them that we heard about in Black-Owned, Char Adams' work, where they're struggling and white people then sabotage them and they're barely making it or had to go out of business? Like, has it been the same experience for the bookstores in other parts of the world too? I guess I could go and look and see. Do they have a website for Timbuktu in London, or Books About Us in Kingston? Do they have a website where we can go and see what the store looks like? And do they have the ISIS papers at Timbuktu in London? That's what. Anyway, I'm super interested. We have listeners who are in any of those parts of the world or have visited, even if you don't live there, but if you have visited any of those bookstores in some of the other regions, or even Essewan, if you headed up before they went out of business, or at least the physical location went out of business, let us know. Share your experience as we move along. But I'm going to see if those bookstores are still in existence once I get a free hand here. Let's see. We'll nab folks who dialed in and the folks who wrote in. Let us see. I'll get our folks who wrote in. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. Chapter 2. Number 1. Hypotheses. Dimension 1. I hypothesize that institutions such as Pan-African bookstores historically have been sites of resistance engaged in a discursive power struggle with the white mainstream institutions. Hypotheses. Dimensions. 2. I hypothesize that differences in other dimensions of identity, i.e. class, nationality, gender, religion, will lead to internal power struggles. Hypotheses dimension number 3. I hypothesize that an international web of Pan-African resistance is formed by links between these sites of resistance in different local, national, and international areas. Hypotheses dimension 4. I hypothesize that the themes evident in the store material and shop member interactions are historically rooted. It would be interesting to see this type of detailed approach applied to, for example, the following hypotheses. Do all people classified as white practice racism, white supremacy, hey, or really any other sort of serious, counter-racist study like, hey, let's roll up our sleeves and investigate. And in fact, our narrator, she said the same thing. She said, oh my goodness. She started narrating and she was commenting before we, were reading it on the cows. And she said, man, I could see how, because it's not a book, I could see how some people might say, man, this is boring. Like, oh my God, shh. But wow, to see this is a detailed scientific study of racism and black bookstores around the world. Wow. It's so thorough. Dee explains the whole process, and this is what my method looks like. Even I have to say, with the context of reading and just talking to Dorothy Roberts about her new book, the Mixed Marriage Project, so-called. This is a project, experiment no less. What Dorothy Roberts' white daddy was doing, that ain't this by no stretch of the imagination. Like, woo, man. And I mean, the word imagine is in that there book 53 times. You can put it in there 5,000 times. Her white daddy's porn collection ain't nowhere close to all this and my hypotheses about the mixed race peoples, and get out of here. Number 2, procedure and methodology. White daddy ain't had no procedure and methodology neither. Qualitative versus quantitative approaches, sampling within the site. The mapping tour, selective sampling, snowball sampling. Initial tour through the sites. Selective sampling is used when selective observations are performed at selective sub-sites within the site. Snowball sampling. I intend to use snowball sampling to generate a chain of informants who will be pertinent to the emerging theory. Open, relational, and theoretical sampling. Open sampling, relational or variational sampling, theoretical sampling. Stops then. The method essentially seems to be direct observation of behaviors for the most part. Maybe not fundamentally all that different from what Mr. Fuller accomplished. Also a fan of doing scientific study, making observations of behaviors and such. Think that would be qualitative study. Let's see. 3. Qualitative versus quantitative standards of research soundness. In qualitative research, the goal is credibility, transferability, generalizability versus external validity. Traditional social science, external validity refers to how well the findings of the experiment apply to situations not tested. Direct. Triangulation, the act of bringing more than one source of data to bear on a single point. Dependability versus replicability. When performing qualitative research, one does not pretend to be replicable because of the following assumption. We assume the qualitative research by its very nature cannot be replicated because the real world changes. Confirmability versus objectivity. I have never read this type of social science research. I have read some research, the so-called hard sciences. Fascinating how social science methods attempt to apply a quasi-form of quantifiable data collection. One of the essential aspects of hard science research is reproducibility by other researchers. Maybe it is my misreading of this section, but it seems that the author is saying that this type of social science research is not replicable, but is confirmable. Interesting distinction made between replicable versus confirmable. If that is the case, then it seems like it is an easy situation to commit fraud, since no one needs to reproduce your results in order for them to be credible, particularly within the context of a global system of racism, white supremacy. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding what the author is trying to convey. Could be. That is interesting though, because I mean, man, that comes up so much in research and people being accused of lying and all the rest of it. And what he said about a research project being replicable is very important. It should be. You give us all this detail, right, nuance of how you did your study and what you were investigating. We should be able, me and Bob and Susan, whoever, we should be able to look at what you did, go apply the same results, do the same thing. That's supposed to be very important for how we go about, being scientific about things. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind. Maybe even go back, reread that. Let's see. 4. Reactivity. Sensitivity versus controlling. The notion of subject reactivity refers to the fact that the researcher's presence will produce reactions in the subject, thus changing the naturalness of the subject context. Traditionally, these reactive effects are considered biases in the research. Indeed, in quantitative research, the attempt is to control the reactivity. However, given the interactive nature of qualitative research, the aim is for the qualitative researcher to be sensitive to reactivity and incorporate both subject and researcher reactivity into the analyses. The very act of performing the research, experiment, study, introduces biases, has also been argued in the so-called hard sciences, such as biology, chemistry, physics. Maybe all research is inherently susceptible to bias. I think that's probably true. Have to be on guard about that. 5. Oral history, ethnographic and audiovisual procedure. Oral history, in terms of the oral history component, Moore states that most of the history of black life has been written and interpreted by elites. In America in particular, it is commonplace for elite whites to control the written word when it comes to interpretation. I intend to break from this tradition. I think a mention of W.E.B. Du Bois is appropriate. He is considered a foundational figure in American social sciences. Particularly his 1899 seminal research work, The Philadelphia Negro. E. Franklin Frazier as well. I think he's done seminal social scientist E. Franklin Frazier, who Minister Malcolm X gave a... Is Negro History Month still? Yes. Minister Malcolm X had lots of kudos for E. Franklin Frazier. His book, Black Bourgeoisie, The Black Church in America. He's got quite a few books. And then he also had a number of... he was a social scientist, so he did a lot of research papers as well. But E. Franklin Frazier, his body of work is extraordinary. If we want to give our kudos to black social scientists from way back when. 6. Ethnography, in order to cross-validate the historical dynamics as well as get at members' meanings during contemporary bookstore activities. Ethnographic data was collected using the following observational procedures: passive participation, limited interaction, participant observation, interview techniques, eavesdropping, and situational conversation. Is eavesdropping correct, ethical? I guess with question. You are in a public place. I guess folks have thoughts on that, particularly for black bookstores. Is eavesdropping correct, ethical for a study? You are in a public place. So, I mean, it can't be that much of an expectation of privacy. It would depend on what they're talking. I mean, if they're just talking about books, you're in a bookstore, and if you're talking about books, authors, even really if you were talking about racism, because they might have books there that are on racism. So even if you were talking about that, is there anything in what would be? I guess I'd go for what would be incorrect. You're in a bookstore. 2 victims of racism. They're in a bookstore and they're talking about books, and I overhear this and I include their conversation in my study on black bookstores and racism. What would be incorrect about that? I'm having a difficult time processing what would be I guess you could say maybe it's unethical. Maybe I guess you could, if you're there, you're studying, if you talk to the proprietors and they're okay with you just hanging out to study and see what's going on or what have you, you could go up to the people that you've been eavesdropping on and say, hey, I'm Dr. Beckles and I'm doing this study on racism in the bookstore, and I was listening, I overheard some of what you all said. Are you okay with me including that in my report? I guess you could do that sort of thing to just let them know, give them a heads up that you overheard them and would like to include, to just make sure they're acceptable with it. I mean, but it is a public space. I mean, it's not like you're at a church or in the confessional or the doctor's office or something like that. You're in a public space. They have public events. I was just at a bookstore yesterday where they had a public event. So I mean, I don't know that you would need someone to, hey man, everything that was said at the Dorothy Roberts event yesterday, we got your permission if I want to write, what happened about that. I mean, you're at a public place, right? Anyway, that's my thought. I guess you could, the ethical component, maybe that's, a little bit more challenging, maybe especially for a black book shop, since these are sites of surveillance anyway. We'll think on it as we roll. Let's see. 7, audiovisual filming. Film can be quite useful in social sciences, has a long history as film ethnography. Thus, I used film to record the spontaneous discussions and meetings occurring at bookshops. Only filming of oral history interviews and daily bookshop activity was done in Kingston, Jamaica, where I was allowed to videotape. Unfortunately, in the U.S. and England, because of the political history of these bookstores, setting up a camera in the middle of the store to document daily activities, lectures, oral histories was received negatively by bookstore members. With good reason that they would be suspicious. And I think in fact, can I pause here just because we're supposed to be doing our respects for the great scholarship of Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, who didn't even reach the age of 40, reportedly took his own life. We need someone like this here, classified as black, privileged black male, doing scholarship to try to understand racism, white supremacy, and black bookstores. Like, oh my God. And he was right here in Washington State. Like, man, I take that so personal. Anyway, but in terms of black people in the States and the UK feeling some type of way about having a camera set up in the black bookstore, Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles also wrote Black Bookstores, Black Power, and the FBI, the Case of Drum and Spear. Now, I think Dr. Welsing is going to pop up in the dissertation that we're reading right now in connection with Drum and Spear, which we heard about in Black-Owned from Char Adams, but he has a whole separate report that is just about the repression and racism against the Drum and Spear bookstore in Washington, D.C. So that might be many reasons why black people, they, whoa, you got the camera set up. Wait a minute now. What's going on here? And now that, you coming in, if you want to put those two together, you coming in with a pen and pad, and you just want to sit down and listen and write notes. Oh, okay, they were talking about this. Okay, blah, blah, blah. As opposed to, I'm going to come in with my tripod, especially now they got facial recognition technology and all the rest of it. Like, whoa. Like, nah, I do not feel comfortable about it. And really, this is the exact same thing I said yesterday. You got somebody with a state university doing some sort of surveillance project. Like, whoa, you gonna have this end up in a box or a file at a university for the next 100 years? Because those are depositories where white people can go and dig. And it's going to be mostly white people who will have access to this, where they can go and dig through and write, what you got here? What were they reading at the book? Whoa. What were they talking about at the bookstore? What lecture did they have at the Negro bookstore? I would have felt some type of way about that too. And I guess you could even take from that and say, yeah, I would even feel some type of way about someone coming in with a pen and pad and writing down, and, I'm going to write down, I'm going to eavesdrop on what y'all talking about at the bookstore. Like, what? I could see that. Black Bookstores, Black Power, and the FBI, the Case of Drum and Spear. Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles. Let's see. Number 8. I first encountered the term site of resistance when I read the title of one of Bell Hooks's chapters, Home Place, a Site of Resistance. She discusses the black family home place as a specific site of resistance and gives suggestions as to what a site of resistance could be. Unfortunately, Hooks neither spells out in detail the conceptual criteria for a site of resistance, nor does she say where she got the term from. I think Dr. Curry criticizes Bell Hooks for not providing any details or references when she makes assertions or theories. See the Katherine Massey Book Club, The Man Knot, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood. Citations are important, very. The other people might even, not just to give kudos, other people might want to build on your work. Like this, it seemed like, Dr. Beckles was impressed by what Bell Hooks had to say, the late Bell Hooks, who passed away recently. Yeah, it might have just been, where did you get this concept from? I can go and read and see what they had to say about all this. And maybe they had, other suggestions about sites of resistance that he can then apply to black bookstores. Citations are important. Let's see. 9. Racial site would be a site dependent upon race as the organizing principles or rules of the game. Interesting metaphor. I'm not sure the bookstore owners would think that they are involved in a game. Maybe it is just a term, jargon, used in social science research. Could be. I don't. So we'll say racial site would be a site dependent upon racism as the organizing principle or rule of the business. Now, directly, I would say directly, indirectly, any black person opening a bookstore or really any other store, it is a racial site, and racism is going to be the guiding principle of what they're doing directly, indirectly. That's going to be the case anyway. Now, for the black bookstores, does this mean like in terms of when you go in the store and how it operates and their ethos and everything, the books that they have, all that is the guiding principle is organizing or racism, white supremacy. This is going to organize how we operate our business and all that. Like, I don't know. I guess for some people that seems to be the case. Like S.O.W.S Books, he talked about that one where they have Neely Fuller there on a regular basis and Dr. Welsing there on a regular basis, and other folks come in to talk about finance and really try and help black people do things, having emergency lectures to try and help black people during the LA riots because that's the part of the world where they were in. That would seem like, yeah, counter racism, these are the organizing principles about this bookstore, providing constructive information for victims of racism. I do think there are some bookstores that are owned by black people where that is not the case, where it would just be, we got Harry Potter. We won't do no lectures from Dr. Welsing or, Dr. Ken, that sort of thing. Like, I think you got some of that too. So, anyway, let's see. Number 10. Marginalized subjects resist the dominant group's construction of their identity as the production of black counter-hegemonic discourse. Question: could one substitute counter-racism discourse? Absolutely. I think I'd said before that term hegemonic, that is, I think, a more white academic institution type of a term, but it is synonymous. We've had some of our guests, and I've heard a number of folks, white supremacy synonymous with white hegemony. So counter-hegemonic, counter-racism absolutely would make perfect substitute. Let's see. Number 11, research site sample, Gilroy. Moving beyond the dogmatic focus of national or nationalistic traditions commonly found in Euro-American cultural thought by suggesting that such approaches lead to an ethnic absolutism which fails to incorporate the cultural exchanges and transformations occurring between black communities presently and historically. Alternatively, he suggests a transnational or diaspora conceptualization in this respect. We limited the sample site selection to sites in countries bordering the Atlantic and whose black population has historic connections to the Atlantic triangular slave trade. Bookstores were selected from Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. It might be more accurate to refer to Euro-American culture as the global system of racism, white supremacy. I would agree with that totally. Not Euro-American culture. Using terms such as nationalistic do not acknowledge its global nature and may be a form of racial narrowing. I would agree with that as well. White people are a nation to themselves all throughout the known universe. Let's see. And we'll pause there. We'll pick up once we get through the rest of section 2. Let's see. I'll nab a few of my notes and then see if other folks, make sure I didn't miss any of our other folks who wrote in either our email again, untiljustice@gmail.com, and I did, untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll nab other folks who wrote in and make sure we get the other emails as we proceed. Let me see. I'll nab a few of my notes as well. And then we'll get to audio segment number 2. Let's see. Let me go back to the beginning where we started at this week. Make sure I don't go too far to last week. Okay. We start off with on 40, it's not 40, 39. On 39, he writes, the macro aspect, the routine bookstore operations, and the materials contained within are constituted by a political struggle against white racist discourse. I'd even have to pause right there. I think there are, and Char Adams talked about this, and I've been to some. This isn't a criticism, I'm just pointing out, I don't think every bookstore that is owned and operated by a black person is about struggling against white racist discourse, i.e. the system of white supremacy racism. I do not think that is the case. I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be. I'm just saying I don't think that's the case. Waiting to Exhale sold a lot of books, yes. For example, the books and other store material comprising the store are black or African in nature, while focusing on the struggle to represent black identity. The store members conceptualize the shop as both an enactment and producer of black African identity. The store functions as an ideological enactment of black identity. I have no idea what that means. I know we talked last week about, black identity and all the rest of it. Like, what? How does a bookstore function as an ideological enactment of black identity? Like, what? I don't even I want to be flagrant. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what black identity means other than victim of white supremacy and like double whammy victim of white supremacy. Other than, I don't know how a bookstore would function or enact that. Double whammy victim of white supremacy black people. Now, I'm thinking like if some of the bookstores that he talks about, like is it kente cloth and African iconography on the walls and paintings and red, black, and green colors? Like, is that with a black fist on the wall and Huey P. Newton sitting in the wicker chair? Like, is that enacting black identity? Man, if it is, like, I do not want that. If anything, maybe enacting universal man, universal woman, like striving to get to that, replacing white supremacy with justice. But yeah, I don't know what black identity is. Lots of people fight over that. I don't see universal agreement over that. And then I don't even know that we need that enacted, whatever that means. We just need information to help us solve this problem. Even the representing Negro identity, we don't even need that. White people have shown that we're monkeys and all the rest of it. I don't even think we need the bookstore that Obama ain't no monkey. We don't even need that. Just replace white supremacy with justice. Let's see. The bookstore is regarded as a political site by non-members. Does that mean white people? As such, the store struggles against the repressive tactics of the mainstream, such as verbal abuse, bomb threats. Now, I even pause right there like, whoa. And that's not funny, especially if you work at the store. But like, we did just read, or not even we, because we had really poor participation, but tonight we bombed the U.S. Capitol. And I said, for somebody, you want to talk about racist culture, white culture, I said, for somebody, that right there is white culture. You niggers thinking you gonna read. Not if I get to tick, tick, boom, you ain't gonna read nothing now. Blow up the bookstore. Blow up the bookstore. Dill and Reb rolling over in the grave. Now, they did shoot up the library. Exclusion from the mainstream bookstore associations and functions, redlining tactics, harassment from the local state and federal government institutions, i.e. police and the FBI. All of that is why I say, when we start talking about black bookstores, I do not want to hear, or I can hear it, but I don't want to hear no major emphasis or even starting at the beginning and saying that now the reason that the Negro bookstores failed is because old Leroy, he didn't have no business plan. Old Leroy, you know, he ain't no shrewd entrepreneur like old Elon Musk. You know, old Leroy, he didn't know how to order the books properly, and he was rude to the customers, and he didn't sweep the store out properly. Like, pause on all of that. You could stop at the bomb threats and leave everything off. If Jeff Bezos and them at Amazon and all the rest of the white bookstores, they don't have to deal with bomb threats at their bookstore. Elliott Bay Books, where I was at yesterday for Dorothy Roberts, I don't think they had no bomb threats. You let that militant nigger come in here and get sassy with Dorothy Roberts and I'm fitting to bomb your store. That didn't happen. How you gonna run it? How you even gonna sweep the store out properly? We got a bomb threat today. Do we have to clear the store out? Do we have to close? We got to call the police? Let's see. It says, number 2, while the business was considered political by the members, the community it served was perceived to be non-political or unconscious. I said, wow, so black people were thought of as being non-political or unconscious. And I say, well, white people don't allow us to read, so I guess if you got a whole lot of people that are not informed or poorly informed, and then you don't let them read nothing about except some old rubbish and the hate you give and all that other old fool talk, then I guess, yeah, you'll have people that are non-political. They can do some gyrating and dance and sing and, yeah, unconscious. That's what we want. Easy to dominate forever. Let's see. When they talked about sharing information at the micro level, and they said, he said, this occurs between travelers, store members, at the oral level of discourse. Store members bring information, books, new ideas about black identity to the store, which are discussed by patrons. Again, that black identity is a big part of all this. That I'm not so interested in, just because, you know, black identity, victims of white supremacy, and that's that. I'm not into exploring no negritude and blackness. But that exchange, we heard about that in Char Adams, which is another one where I was like, if I wasn't doing a study, if it was just me and I was at the bookstore minding my own business and I heard, you know, 2 or 3 other black people and they were over and they said, man, that Delectable Negro is the best book I ever heard. Like, oh my God, you hear what he was talking about and them raping Leroy? And remember, if I heard that and I had never heard Delectable Negro, write that down. Delectable Negro, they were raping Leroy. You know, I wouldn't feel any type of way about eavesdropping and, you know, any goodies that I could pick up, like, yay for me. That's why I came, you know. We're in a public place, you know. Let's see. And it reminded me, Char Adams, she talked about the young black bookstore owner. He went to Essalon Books, and he was writing down the book titles because he was going to go order them, and he kind of got in trouble. Like, hey, man, you don't come over here and just pilfer our titles. You need to buy all that, man. There's rules to all this. Let's see. The page 49. He talks about his whole process for generating hypotheses, which again, I think, you know, important. There is a scientific method for coming to conclusions and trying to understand the world in which we live that is dominated by racism. Hey, you can start out with just having a question, a hypothesis. And then I go out and make an evaluation. I get my data to make a test, and then I see, do I need to make some changes, maybe reword, you know, and then I go out and get a little bit more data. That's making a serious study. We need more of that about it. Hey, let's get that study. Hey, do all individuals classified as white practice racism, white supremacy? Let's find out. And we ain't gonna waste time talking about infants. Let's see. Talks about the history. In terms of oral history, the oral history component, Moore states that most of the history of black life has been written and interpreted by elites. Elites meaning whites. And then he goes right, very next sentence. In America in particular, it is commonplace for elite whites to control the written word when it comes to interpreting the experiences of African Americans. That right there, because this was written 30 years ago, last century, I find it disingenuous when white people say, "Now, I felt some type of way being classified as white and writing this history about you niggers." That is the whole history of history in the last 200, 300 years. They don't go and get Leroy and I don't feel qualified to write about you niggers. You know, you got Lakeisha. Let's let her come and write all this, because it wouldn't be right for me to what? That's been like forever. So I think that is totally, and even recent history, that's always what it is. You have a few black people here and there under tremendous pressure. You can take Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles again. Suicide, he didn't even reach 40. I just talked about medical apartheid, Harriet Washington. She was pressured. They done, don't you write all this here stuff talking about we got racist doctors and we done experimented and cut up Sam's jaw. Don't you write all that in no book. What are you doing that for? It's supposed to be white people control. That doesn't say that we shouldn't write, but that's just saying. And even beyond written, even when you get to documentaries and all the rest of it, oral history, I mean, unless you're talking about what you want to go back in the closet and talk about, white people dominate the world, man. All areas of people activity. It's not like you can say, well, I'm going to go get on YouTube. They dominate that too, man. Let's see. Someone who comes up in the Katherine Massey Book Club more often than anyone, and I just got a whole biography on them. I said we need to either read or, do something to study. Joel Spingarn, this is on page 57. He says, I utilized oral history interviews in order to document the bookstore members' own interpretation of their history. Oral history were collected according to the guidelines set by the Oral History Association at UCLA's Oral History Program. As such, in order to prepare for the interviews, I conducted background library research on printed materials and archival documents. Letters, newspapers, articles will be investigated. Primary libraries were the Schomburg Research Center in Black Culture in Harlem, New York, the Moreland Spingarn Archive Center in Washington, D.C. Joel Spingarn has his name on so many things. He has an NAACP Image Award. This is a white man with an NAACP Image Award. He worked for the United States military and spied on black people for years. He had a position in the NAACP so he could more easily spy on black people for years. And they got more, and even it's probably accurately so, because that's what he did, stockpile information on niggers. The Moreland Spingarn Archive Center. We just talked about Mr. Spingarn with one of our more recent white guests. But he comes up all the time, all the way back to when we were reading about Little Rock, Arkansas, Little Rock 9. He comes up all the time. Let's see. I thought that his collection of where he went for his studies, because it continues after the Moreland Moreland Spingarn Archive Center. He is at the Inglewood branch of UCLA. Well, he went to UCLA, so that's easy. He lives hard there. You don't get credit for those. But then he goes to the Mona Campus Main Library West Indies Collection, the University of West Indies Mona Campus Oral History Collection in England, the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton, the Warwick Center for Race and Ethnic Relations, Goldsmiths Library. Like, wow. To me, that is so impressive to be able to go to all of those locations just to study racism, counter-racism at black bookstores. And I would add, that's the sort of thing that generally white people get the time, funding to do something like that. All of that travel and go staying overnight, because I mean, you can't go to London just for like a day. That's going to have to be like a week, maybe even a month or something to go and do all that research. And then Jamaica, what have you. Like, wow. So impressive, Dr. Beckles. Let's see. All of that, and then when he says the final oral history questionnaire was also used as the basis for a survey instrument, 100 surveys were personally handed out to the attenders of the American Bookseller Association Black Booksellers meeting in August 1994. I wonder, do they still have that? That would be interesting to go check out, right? Moreover, 10 were mailed the surveys out to black bookshops in England. 2 were sent to black bookshops in Jamaica, and also during August of 1994, follow-up calls were made 1 month later. Only 8 were returned, however, and all from the U.S. Like, dang. I mean, to send out 112, 2 in England, or 2 in Jamaica, 10 to England, and then 100 that he personally handed out to black people at the Bookseller Association meeting. And then he called to follow up. Only 8? Man, that is pretty measly return on investment for all that hard effort that he put into. Now, I will say, if I'm a black bookstore owner and we're getting bomb threats and police threats and FBI raids and IRS threats, might not have time to fill out that survey either. Priorities. Might have lost the survey when we were trying to scurry to get away from the bomb threat. Let's see. I would not want to be filmed in a black bookstore. Just saying. I probably would not. In fact, at the bookstore for the Dorothy Roberts event yesterday, people in the audience were putting their cameras up as they do. You want to put this on social media. I was here. Look at me. All that. And I'm like, I am not here to be on your social media page or none of that. Like, you're supposed to be shooting the people on stage. Like, not us out here in the, I didn't come in makeup and dressed in my flies gear so I could get in pose and all that. Like, come on, man. Like, I would not want to be on film at a black bookstore, really at a bookstore period, because this wasn't at a black bookstore. So I would not want to be on film at a bookstore period, knowing what I do about COINTELPRO and especially about black people readers. But I wouldn't be in the fiction section at any bookstore. So I would not want to be on film for any reason. I couldn't think of any scenario where it would benefit me or even be neutral. Negro at a bookstore with something that is nonfiction, probably related to racism. How's this going to end well? Let's see. Make sure, maybe one more before we get to, I said the bookstores. I'm going to check once I get a free moment to see if those bookstores, Timbuktu in London and Books About Us in Jamaica, I'm going to see if these bookstores still exist. And now I'm curious to see, like I said, has their history been similar to Esalen Books, or has it been a easier road, or even if it's just books for us in Jamaica, do they not have all that police repression against, like, do they not have bomb threats, at the Jamaican bookshop? I'm super curious. Maybe he'll give some of the details on all of it, because he said that they let them do the video camera down there. So maybe he'll give some details on all that. Any hoodles. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anyone. Folks are all good. I will email. I know someone had emailed and was hoping to nab a copy of the dissertation. I will see if I can hook them up. Others as well. You should be able to nab it publicly. Unless you have difficulties. If you do, drop me a line and I should be able to help out with all of that. But we will get to audio segment number 2. The late, great Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, Pan-African Sites of Resistance. We're picking up in kind of the midpoint of Chapter 2, Katherine Massey Book Club.
Initial research site methods. Field entry had been facilitated previously via letter correspondence and verbal agreements. The following preliminaries were accomplished. A. Contacting research sites. Verbal contact was made with the owners at both research sites to set up initial meetings. A list of contacts had been established as the starting point for the research. I intend to use this list as a referral base for other possible subjects for the oral history interviews via snowball sampling. B. I outlined the project to bookstore owners and staff. The bookstore owners had been contacted by entree letter documents. Included in this document was an introduction of myself, a general overview of the purpose and research procedures, and approximate duration of the project. The owners were asked to circulate the letter to their staff. C. Logistics ethics. Logistical and ethical considerations were discussed with the staff upon arrival at the stores. Access to stores and store areas were negotiated, and confidentiality of the research was reviewed. Finally, I reiterated my research intentions as well as answered questions posed by the staff as openly as possible. D. The mapping tour. Following the above briefing, I performed a mapping tour in order to gain an initial insight into the particular bookstore population and to provide initial theoretical leads and/or mini-hypotheses. One of the staff was asked to give me a tour through the site and to brief me on daily staff schedules and what routine special events were planned for the year. Following this, an area was selected near one of the bookshelves. There, I constructed drawings of the internal and external physical layout of the site. Moreover, 3 site maps were made: social, spatial, and temporal. The social maps included the number and variety of persons in the store, both staff and patrons. Secondly, a spatial map was constructed depicting the location of persons, equipment, work centers, off-limit centers, and corridors used. Finally, temporal maps of store rhythms were created. Notes and drawings were taken, focusing on areas of greater or lesser activity and how the activity changed with time, shop composition, and time of day. Data definitions. A. Data. Following Eastland's ethnographic work on feminist bookstores, I will utilize a comprehensive definition of data. As such, the primary data for my project will initially come from 7 sources. 1. The oral memories of past and present bookstore staff and patron. 2. The organization's texts, advertisements, newspapers, flyers, posters, cassette tapes, etc. 3. The literature sold, distributed, and referenced in the store. 4. The naturally occurring talk among bookstore members during interaction. 5. The nonverbal interactions occurring within the bookstore. 6. the utilization of physical space of the business. 7. My own personal experiences in the store. With this database, my analytic task was to integrate the varied datum to provide an understanding or interpretation of the way bookstore members perceive A. the function of the bookstores, as well as B. their own function in the Pan-African struggle. B. Data collection. Following Schatzman and Strauss in general and Eastland in particular, 3 general settings will be used to collect data. 1. The business setting, the bookstore in which business-related activity occurs. 2. Social settings, arenas outside the bookstore where bookstore members gather socially. 3. Structured meetings, gatherings occurring outside the bookstore site which bookstore members attend, conferences, political meetings, etc. Verification of the orienting framework. The primary component used for studying the historical aspects was the obtainment of oral histories. Contemporary and previous bookstore staff and members will be the subjects. A 6-step procedure was followed in each store. 1. In order to prepare for the interviews, background library research and archival documents, letters, newspapers, articles, shop artifacts, important books were investigated. 2. Following this, I conducted informal interviewing with staff and customers in terms of the store's general development history. Selective sampling was performed with the bookstore staff and customers in terms of the mapping tour. 3. Moreover, vis-a-vis the mapping tour, initial data was gathered in terms of shop merchandise, physical aspects, and spatial aspects. This information was used in terms of questions surrounding changes in the shop. 4. The background material was related to the orienting framework. This information subsequently formed the initial core of the formal oral history questions. Oral histories will be conducted in both group and one-on-one sessions. Those questions were of an open-ended format. Snowball sampling was then employed in order to generate more informants for more historical data analysis. These additional informants were used to gain additional perspectives and details about the shop's history, as well as to provide a means of cross-validation. 6. Comparative analysis. Cross-shop data was compared to previous data and analytical categories developed from each shop, and conclusions were drawn. As the interviews are cumulative experiences, the content of each interview or conversation gave form and substance to the next one. Comparability across shops in terms of respondents' answers was obtained by gradually working similar content into the interview from previous interviews and re-interviewing former subjects. The second primary component was obtaining contemporary data via ethnography and videotaping. This proceeded as follows. A. Vis-a-vis the mapping tour, daily ethnographic field notes and videotaping when possible was performed at both site settings in order to analyze the bookstore activity. Open sampling was employed with attention initially oriented to the description of stores, shop activity, work schedules, staff and customer description and interaction within the store materials, texts, posters, flyers, etc. B. Using relational sampling, I attempted to investigate the initial hypothesis generated from the open sampling phase. Therefore, I searched for as many differences as possible at the dimensional categorical level. For example, from the category Black versus Negro category, I sampled in terms of what Black authors, filmmakers, artists are not considered sellouts, zombies, liars. By proceeding from selective subsite to subsite within and external to the bookstore and selectively observing categories and dimensions such as the above, these and other such differences were sought out, relating to the orienting framework and then modified, retested in the field. To reiterate, sampling priority is placed on interest to the study and emerging theory rather than on randomness of sample. C. Theoretical and discriminate sampling techniques were used to verify the developing theory. Thus, if Black versus Negro is a concept that consistently proved relevant across bookstore members and related to another category such as core text, it became part of the evolving theory. Relationships between categories were tested by directly choosing sites, persons, and documents that will maximize this relationship and develop it further. Negative cases where the relationship does not exist will be sought out in order to qualify the relationship. Finally, the obtained data was compared to oral history information for cross-validation. Videotaping of on-site activity was employed at the later stages of the research when, after a few weeks had passed, another level of trust had been reached between myself and the hosts. As such, I employed opportunity sampling techniques and videotaped bookstore areas where the following was maximized: conversations, displaying and selling of Africa materials, customer and staff attire, spatial relations, physical dimensions of the store. The period of research. The approximate time for the actual fieldwork was 12 months, from March 1994 to September 1995. Such an extended period of time was necessary for 3 reasons. A. Complex processes demand long-term, in-depth exploration as opposed to snapshot analysis. Given the political nature of the shops, a time period to establish trust must have elapsed before I gained access to certain information and areas of the site. C. Owners of the shop frequently travel and are gone for weeks at a time. Summary. The above summation of qualitative research will hopefully serve as an aid to the reader, serving as a methodological backdrop throughout the remainder of the project presentation. For now, we turn to develop the substantive aspects of the project. The remainder of the dissertation is divided into 3 data sections and general project conclusions. Section 1 deals with the historical context, England, and its relationship to the development of Black Bookstore movement. It is provided first as one of the main assumptions guiding the project is that the history of racist discourse disseminated from the British Academy and Crown set the stage for the discursive battles waged in the U.S. and the Caribbean in later years. As such, following the detailed presentation of the British historical context, I present Section 2, the historic development of Black bookstores in the U.S. Finally, Section 3 pertains to the contemporary context of Black bookstores in the U.S., England, and the Caribbean. General project conclusions are subsequently presented. Thus stated, we turn first to analyze the historical legacy of England's Black bookshop movement. Section 2. The historical legacy of England's Black bookshop movement. Introduction. In this section, the development of England's Black bookshop movement is situated in its historical context. As the focus of the bookshop movement was the racial identity struggle, the 2 primary correlated themes of white domination and Black resistance provide the main dynamic for this chapter. Thus we see the following pattern present. First, racist discourses representing the meaning of Black African identity as inferior, primitive, and subordinate to white European identity were propagated by the British intelligentsia via their dominant institutions. Secondly, in response, Black British activists attempted to counter these racist definitions by putting forth their alternative representations of the meaning of black identity. This was accomplished by organizing and forming Pan-African resistance formations such as Pan-African conferences, organizations, presses, and black bookshops. In order to demonstrate the above dynamic, this section is presented in 3 chapters. Chapter 3 is divided into 2 sections. Section 1 provides a brief historical review of the role played by the white British intelligentsia in terms of constructing and disseminating the notion of a racial hierarchy from the 16th to the 19th century. In Section 2, I review how the black social movement and institutions developed as a response up to the early 20th century. In Section 3, I demonstrate how attempts at white domination were prevalent in England during the 1950s. Chapter 4 presents the development of England's black bookshop movement and its relationship to England's black power struggle. In Section 1 of this chapter, I present how black resistance occurred in post-World War II England and how this resulted in a surge of anti-racist organizations such as black bookshops. Section 2 is an analysis of how black bookshops became Pan-African sites of resistance for the British Black Power movement in general and the black education movement in particular. Chapter 5 is the final chapter in this section. In the first section of this chapter, I argue that because black bookshops became significant black political institutions, they were targeted for elimination by England's forces of repression. In Section 2, I demonstrate how black bookshops were able to empower themselves and resist the mainstream forces of domination. A final summary is given at the end in order to recapitulate the major conclusions. Methodology. Much of the review of early historical periods will be guided by the works of Martin, Sivanandan, Fryer, Gilroy, Peterse, and Martin. My primary research, which overlaps and extends their work, is based upon the 20 interviews I conducted during the spring of 1994 in London, England, and the utilization of archival data. The primary interviews referenced in this section were oral histories collected from people who were owners or the staff of the first black bookshops established in England during the 1960s and 1970s time period. Thus stated, we turn first to examine some early instances of how racist discourse began to be produced and disseminated in England. Chapter 3. The construction and dissemination of white supremacy. And they were usually jumbled together in the thinking and writing of British politicians, administrators, and propagandists of empire, who found endless ways of demonstrating and asserting that black people were unfit to govern themselves. Fryer, 1989. Section 1. This section focuses on the dominant side of the racial discourse production, those in control of the political, educational, and media institutions in Britain. As such, below I provide a brief historical review of the practices used by British statesmen, theologues, academics, and press in order to construct black African identity as primitive, negative, and subordinate to white European identity. The British Crown statesmen. Beginning with England's statesmen, we see that not only has the practice of racism had a very long history, but that it was produced and disseminated from the highest of imperial offices. As early as 1596, Queen Elizabeth I had written a letter to her mayors and sheriffs expressing her strong disapproval of the presence of black people in England, ordering that those kinds of people should be deported forthwith. As such, in 1601, the Queen ordered all blackamoors out of her kingdom. These racist pronouncements and practices intensified during 18th and 19th century as racism served to justify England's participation in the African slave trade, the exploitation of more than 300 million black people. Moreover, it expanded into other institutions such as the British Church, which was called into service in order to legitimate slavery. The theologians. Due to the religious leanings of most Europeans, the notion that all human beings were equal in the eyes of God was a commonly held belief. As such, in order for the empire's business of slavery to function unobstructed, slavery had to have religious sanction. African peoples had to be dehumanized in some manner so that they would be outside the ranks of man and thus worthy of the rank of slave. The biblical story of how the curses of Canaan's son, Ham, and all his children were condemned to be the servant of servants was well known. Previously, the link to Canaan was used to explain and justify slavery by the pre-16th century church of the Augustinian. Slaves were slaves because they were the children of Ham, Canaan's son. However, during that time period, slavery was colorless. The institution of slavery only became associated with black skin color in Africans by the Christians as of the 16th century. Peterse notes that given the already existing Christian association of blackness with evil, it was only a small step to the interpretation of the curse of Canaan as an explanation of black skin color in the 17th century. This black skin as curse theory thereby served as a moral justification for the British enslavement of black Africans. The view of Africa as a continent condemned to eternal servitude was eminently suited to theological assessment of slavery. While it was true that all human beings were descended from Adam via Noah, the continents peopled by the descendants of Japheth, Europe, Sem, Asia, and Ham, Africa, were ranked in a master-servant relationship. Peterse, 1993. As such, the main justification of slavery was religious, as Africa was considered to be the continent of the children of Ham. The scientists. In addition to the crown and the theologies, the justification was found in the writings and musings of the British intelligentsia. In their academic discourse lay the conceptual building blocks which, in addition to Christian religion, buttresses modern-day racism. For instance, British philosophers such as John Locke wanted skin color to be counted as an essential property of human beings. Moreover, during the mid-18th century, David Hume wrote the following frequently quoted passage: "I am apt to suspect that the Negroes were naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even an individual eminent in action or speculation. No ingenious manufacturers amongst them, no arts, no scientists." Hume in Peterse, 1993. During the slave era, the main justification was religious. However, the racism found in those 18th century conceptual seeds came to full blossom in the form of 19th century scientific empiricism. As phrenology, racism told the British that they were ruling over peoples who, unlike themselves, lacked force of character. As teleology, racism told the British that black people had been put on earth expressly to work for white people, especially in the tropics. As evolutionism, racism told the British that black people were to be hated, feared, fought, and ultimately exterminated. As anthropology, racism told British that black people were closer to apes than European, that they needed to be humanized, civilized, and controlled, and that these tasks could be performed only by white people. As social Darwinism, racism told the British that black people were intellectually inferior to white people and doomed to extinction. As Anglo-Saxonism, Racism told the British that God had fitted precisely them to rule over others, and that the lesser, degenerate races were better dead. In trusteeship, racism told the British that they had a duty to promote the moral and educational progress of the childlike natives they ruled over. Fryer, 1989. What is important to note is that this explosion in racial theory, as it were, came to its prominence after slavery was prohibited in England, 1807. During Europe's so-called Age of Enlightenment, when abolitionist propaganda predominated. Of no small consequence is the fact that this was the period of European political and economic expansionism in general and the attempt by the Europeans to attain world cultural hegemony. The education and media systems. In England, the doctrines of racism produced by imperial, religious, and scientific sources were disseminated to the English masses via the education system and media. In schools, cheap newspapers, juvenile literature, racism told the British working class that black people were savages whom British rule was rescuing from heathenism and internecine strife. Indeed, the attempt to indoctrinate the English populace were so pervasive that in 1902, J.A. Hobson complained about the persistent attempt to seize the school system for imperialism masquerading as patriotism. Fryer notes that the 19th century British historians were the most vigorous proponents of racism. Additionally, he cites Hobson's work, which revealed that racism was in fact widely and persistently disseminated through schoolbooks and other texts prepared for the education or amusement of children. In terms of local publications, common everyday books, newspapers, and magazines supplemented the formal education system's production and dissemination of negative meaning of Black African identity. Fryer reports on the extent to which racist representations of Africa permeated British children's literature, as well as noting the wide circulation and inexpensive price. By 1880, more juvenile books were being published in Britain than any other type of literature, and over 24 magazines, mostly directed to adolescent males, were appearing weekly on the newsstands. These usually sold for a penny, and the boys' own paper claimed a circulation for over 1 million. In the widely circulated adventure stories of Frederick Marryat, Thomas Mayne Reid, William H.G. Kingston, Robert M. Ballantyne, George A. Henty, and William Stables, Africans are invariably described as ugly, animal-like, unintelligent, incompetent, in abstract thought, physically dirty, cowardly, boastful, lazy, childish, and given to lying and thieving. African customs and behavior are viewed as barbarous. African social and political organization is described as primitive. With Henty in particular, the political implications are made plain and simple. Easy domination of a native is a theme running through all the stories. Submission is complete and service is total. The servant is held enthralled by the Englishman's superiority. Fryer, 1989. Additionally, it must be noted that the racist discourse was not only limited to the written word. Indeed, Fryer suggested that even in the lyrics of juvenile and working-class songs, racism was pervasive. As such, he states that in The Music Hall, racism told the British working class that black people were savages whom British rule was rescuing from heathenism and internecine strife. We have briefly dealt with the dominant side of the racial structure. We now move on to demonstrate how British blacks used what little political power they had to resist these racist constructions of their identity.
Context of white supremacy. We will pick up next week. We'll be on section 2 of chapter 3 for me specifically. That is page 89. Katherine Massey Book Club. The number to dial 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. I will finish email number 1, then I'll get to some of my thoughts, observations, see if folks have any thoughts on the second chunk of the reading. Let's see. Email number 1, data definitions. I will utilize a comprehensive definition of data, oral memories of past and present bookstore and patrons, advertisements, newspapers, flyers, posters, cassette tapes, etc. Literature sold, distributed, and referenced in the store, naturally occurring talk among bookstore members during interaction, and non-verbal interaction occurring within the store. The utilization of physical space of the business, my own personal experiences in the store. I have generally thought of data as quantifiable. It can be put in numerical form such that statistical analysis can be applied. Interesting how the term is applied in social science research. And I guess, that's why he took his time to explain, the difference in the types of data collection, and then he went into what he's branding as data for this particular study. And I would say, yeah, that seems logical, the way he has kind of laid it out to do his serious investigation of the bookstores. Like, yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it, in that way before. Number 13, the period of research. The approximate time for the actual field work was 12 months from March 1994 to September 1995. A lot of time, effort, and money is necessary to produce this type of research. No wonder most of the people producing this type of work are classified as white. And if you are too accurate in your research, you will receive death threats and wind off moving out to Scotland like Dr. Tommy J. Curry. Hey, black male privilege. They threatened to bomb your house too? Bookstore? Like, man, black male privilege. But it is extra. I said that, man, like to go to Jamaica, London. Like I said, that can't be no, well, we just going to stay here for 2 days and, get what we can. Like, you'd have to be there for like maybe a month, maybe months, plural. And then you got to go to England. And then even, unless you live in LA, you got to go out there and trek and do all that. Like, man, that takes a lot of labor. Let's see. Section 2. Historical legacy of England's Black Bookshop movement. Chapter 3, the construction and dissemination of white supremacy. As early as 1596, Queen Elizabeth I had written a letter to her mayors and sheriffs expressing her strong disapproval of the presence of black people in England. Could this be the approximate date for the beginning of the global system of racism, white supremacy? Who knows? 2, ordering those kinds of people should be deported. These racist pronouncements and practices intensified during the 18th and 19th century as racism served to justify England's participation in the African slave trade. The exploitation of more than 300 million black people, it expanded into other institutions such as the British Church, which was called into service in order to legitimize slavery, in order for the empire's business of slavery to function unobstructed. Slavery had to have religious sanction. Biblical story of how the curse of Canaan's son Ham. And then he goes on the other areas. I found this section constructive because it demonstrated the totality of what is required to initiate, maintain, and expand the global system of racism, white supremacy, providing historical examples of domination in all 9 areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. This is another one that I look at now. If I'm classified as white, how would I not be racist with all of this? We need that study. Let's see. Much obliged. Email is untiljustice@gmail.com. I'll keep an eye out, see if other folks have emails to send in, and then we'll see if folks have thoughts. Star 61 if you have thoughts to share as well. I'll get some of my thoughts on this chunk of the reading also. Let's see. For chapter 2, where we are, let me go back a little bit here. Okay, I think went too far. Okay, for the second section where we started at, he says, wait a minute, let me get the whole paragraph. Okay, so he's talking about in his section on mapping and specific things that he's paying attention to when he goes to the bookstores. He says, section B, using relational sampling, I attempted to investigate the initial hypotheses generated from the open sampling phase. Therefore, I searched for as many differences as possible at the dimensional categorical level. For example, from the category Black versus Negro category, I sampled in terms of what Black authors, filmmakers, artists are not considered sellouts, zombies, liars, no name calling. Dang, like, what is that? I guess we have to keep reading. Like, is that the conversation in the Black Bookstore? Like, who is the sellout of the week? Who is the zombie of the week? Maybe that's old. Did they still say that? Maybe got to upgrade for that. But dang, that's what, who is the Negro of the week? I guess they got new terms that they would put on it now. But like, not even. Hey, who is the most racist this week? You think this white person is racist? Oh no, he can't be racist. Oh yes, he is. I think he. None of that. You think Leroy or Jamal? Who Tom the most this week? Come on. Come on. I hope that's not it, but I mean, that's the example. Like, what's the most 5 core books that we need to help us replace white supremacy? Zombie niggers. But conflict, that is Black culture. I could totally believe. That's what he said you're trying to do. I have heard some, now that I'm thinking about it, I am aware of some studies, especially in social sciences, where you try and do the like fly on the wall and just observe, and then try and make, rankings and classify what you observe, try to make some sense of it or process it all. But it would not surprise me at all if that's the type of thing that you heard, or a gender wars type conflict is Leroy's fault. No, it's Lakeisha's fault. That sort of thing. It would not surprise me at all if that was very, very common, even in not just Black bookstores, really anywhere where it's a lot of Black people. Conflict with other Black people. That's kind of what I would expect the dialogue to be about. Let's see. When the study is remarkable for a lot of reasons, but man, he said the time period was 12 months, March 94 to September of 1995. Whoa. I mean, whoa. Man, you go through the arrest of Orenthal James and most of the trial and Tim McVeigh. I mean, it's a lot during that chunk of time. You're a few weeks from the Million Man March in D.C. Black Bookstores right there too. That in fact, I would think that would have been coming up in the Black Bookstores because it was so close to that event happening. I'm sure Black Bookstores would have been a place where you maybe could get the Final Call or other books talking, or even Black publications talking about that event. It's going to be constructed, blah, 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 or people talking about you going, that sort of thing. Amazing chunk of time to start. And Slick Willie, Bill Clinton in office, super predators and all that, them talking about we got to lock up Jamal, like wacky times, wacky times. Let's see. So he kind of lays out, he's going to do his study of these bookstores in the U.S., Jamaica, and England. And he's going to start off with England because he's saying that's the genesis of where these ideas of white supremacy, racism come from. We push off into section 2. I appreciate him giving all of the context because he is a U.S. scholar. So I would think it would be probably a disreport, or at least at this time, maybe not so much now because the Wi-Fi and everything is well ingrained throughout the globe for the most part. So maybe be a little different now. But at least back then, I would expect more U.S. scholars, more U.S. readers to pick up a report like this who probably, we're not scholars on the history of white supremacy, racism in the UK, England. So I think this is great. And just to show how widespread, as our person who wrote in said, all areas of people activity so that white people are trained and learn what it means to be white and how they are to function, behave towards people who are classified as black in particular, non-white in general. Let's see. And even he talked about the access children even are supposed to have this information so they learn very early. White people cannot be ignorant about racism, period. Even what have we been doing for our 17 years, Gus T, and the context of white supremacy? On bottom of page 79, when he's talking about his methodology, he says much of the review of early historical periods will be guided by the works of Martin, Sivanandan, Fryer, Gilroy, Peters. That one, I know the correct pronunciation of the name because that is Jan Nedervan Peters. He was a guest on the context of white supremacy in the summer of 2010. We discussed his book, White on Black, which is one of the books that is referenced in this report. Just talks about, and he joined us from across the pond. He's in the UK. I forgot which part, I forgot which part of the UK he's in, but other part of the pond. But we talked about that book in detail, and white people peeping at black people all over the world and controlling how black people are talked about, controlling the words, images, all of that. But he was a guest on the Cows way back when. Let's see. Chapter 3. When they were talking about hoping that the black people, blackamoors, could be booted out of the UK. That reminded me of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing's work. It reminded me of the Windrush generation, where these are black people who were brought over after World War II. Europe is in ruins, courtesy of Adolf Hitler, and so they're supposed to come in and help clean up and get things right, be a part of the rebuilding, and get us all back cleaned up, ready to go. And a lot of these people, they came from the Caribbean and other territories where white people had dominated and smacked the dark people around. So they came over, helped them clean up and get right. Now these people are older. They don't have paperwork. They didn't give them all the, whatever you would need, citizenship after you even came here and stayed all this time. Really, you've been a part of the crown, as they say, Queen Elizabeth and all the rest of it. You should have been included. But now they say, whoa, where your papers at? You're going to have to go on back over there to the islands. You can't hang out here. All that always find some sort of excuse. You niggers got to get on out of here. Let's see. All areas of people activity in terms of the racism. That's why you can't be ignorant about racism, because it's all areas of people activity. Oh, he does. One footnote I will include, because he does have footnotes here. He says slavery, not only the slave trade, but also as a component in the revenue from colonial plantations, was one of the bases for the fortunes amassed in Liverpool and London, but it was a hidden basis of that European wealth. Jan Nedervan Peters and Eric Williams, both of them have pretty legendary scholarship on this subject matter. Then he goes into the religion of white supremacy and curse of Ham and all that old mumbo jumbo. Racism, you got that. Let's see. Then we get into the phrenology. Heard enough of that this week. And Negro skulls and Negro brains and pseudo-scientific. We got all that. Let's see. I had a special wink since for people, Dorothy Roberts, who's a black female with a white parent, or a non-white female with a white parent. Her white German father is an anthropologist and a peeping Tom. And so I've been talking to her yesterday and reading this goofy worst book ever of hers. So it hit me specially this week as Anthropology, Racism Told British White People that black people were closer to apes than Europeans, that they needed to be humanized, civilized, and controlled, and that these tasks could be performed only by white people. One, I just super appreciate how direct it is. It's not no pussyfooting with the language and trying to come up with a way to not people who don't look like us and dominant society. Are you talking about white people? Just say that. Jesus Christ. People classified as white? Say that. I super appreciate it for that. But yeah, and hey, could have been talking about President Trump a few weeks ago. I told you, he was saying that Obese was in the new movie Primate, got that chimp that went wild and was killing the white people. And I was like, they had to go have President Obama, got the Black History Month chimp movie coming out here attacking the good white people in Hawaii. Colonial site for white people. Let's see. I super appreciate he talks about the historians when he says the historians were the vigorous proponents of racism. I guess that's debate of the religion of white supremacy. It's so much. I mean, everybody did their part. That's kind of the way it seems. Everybody did their part. I think everybody pulled their weight about equal. Like the VGQ. I'm not arguing with Dr. Beckles. He gave pretty convincing case. I think that everybody did about their equal part. All areas of people activity. It didn't seem like white people did too much slacking in their anti-Negro sentiment in so-called UK. Let's see. Primitive black people, got that. He said even if you're an illiterate white person, you still make sure you get all your racist training, because they say Fryer suggests that even in the lyrics of juvenile and working class songs, racism was pervasive. Sound like we got racist jokes again. See, as such, he states that in the music hall, racism told the British working class that black people were savages from British rule, was rescuing from heathenism, internecine strife. He used that word internecine a few times. Like, man, what you don't get it. Then we got some sort of conflict or whatever. That ain't no, you don't call me no internecine strife-ridden apes, and that's why you got to come and mistreat and stomp on us. Like, come on, man. Come on. All areas of people activity, and just on that basis alone, who are the white people that we say are not, is not all white peoples is racist? Who are these non-racist white people again? How did they miss all of this? What's the anecdote so that none of these songs and ditties and jokes and books and newspapers and all the rest of it ain't had no impact on me? I love the Negro. You deport a brown person, black person, non-white person over my dead body. Where, what, who, where did these white people come from? And how did they end up like that, man? Let's see. Anything else? This section. Double check to make sure I did not miss. We will eventually get into the meat and potatoes of his observations now that I know some of what he... hey, is that what they were talking about in the bookstore? Who are the black sellouts? Who are the black zombies? What is that? Is that what what some of the stuff that he heard? Hopefully he'll give us lots of details on that. And then, Dr. Welsing and all that good, Mr. Fuller as well. Maybe some of the other core, but maybe even where they read, like I said, what are the core books in the UK that they think black people should read? What are the core books in Jamaica that they think black people should read to understand white supremacy, racism? Do people read those books? Same thing. In the UK, they have their list of, these are the books, you're black, British, and these are the books that you got to read. Do the black people read them? You're in Jamaica, they give you a list of books. These are the books you got to read. Marcus Garvey is on there, and, whatever. Do people read them? Any hoodles. We will continue next week, as is my understanding with the studies, just for folks if they're going along like, oh man, it's so dense and all that. Generally, once they kind of explain the processes for the study, their hypotheses, what they're looking to examine and all that, generally they get into the meat and potatoes of the study. So hopefully by next week or so, we should be getting into that, even though I do appreciate the pretty direct breakdown of the history of white supremacy, racism in Europe specifically, and hopefully he'll do the same thing for Jamaica as well. But yeah, and then we can get into what he's hearing at the bookstores and all the rest of it as we kind of get into the dissertation. But again, our first non-book at the book club, a little bit different, as it is not written for a general reading audience, serious study. Probably even accurate to say this might be something intended for white people. I don't want to speak for Dr. Beckles, but I mean generally an academic environment like that, probably something intended more for white audience to read, study, all the rest of it. But we'll keep that in mind as we read. Anywho, we will be here tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Our compensatory call-in, where we will, I think, wrap up Black History Month, go over our observations for the past 7 days or so. I think they're still giving out well-earned condolences for the late Jesse Jackson Sr., the trial for the school shooting down in Georgia, white parent being held accountable, hopefully. Lots of things to review for 7, maybe bomb threats to wrap up Black History Month. We'll have to see. Normal time tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That's it. Hopefully worthy of folks Thursday evening. Hopefully we'll get some better information. We'll be more informed. Put these two books together. We'll be extremely informed about the history of racism and attacks against black bookstores. Again, if we have listeners, if you've been to any of these bookstores that he's talking about, Essewan Books, Timbuktu, Books for Us. Let us know. You can write in untiljustice@gmail.com. What was your experience? What do you remember, if you do? What were the people talking about when they were there? Were they talking about other books to read, or books that they just read, or films, or I don't know, they're replacing white supremacy with justice? What was the experience like? Were they talking about black sellouts? Like, what was your experience if you went to any of these establishments? We shall continue. Much obliged for the folks tuning in. Sobriety would be best. Not going to be very effective if you get to the bookstore and you're a little tipsy, a little buzzed. Brain computer might not remember the titles that you saw that are really good that you want to read. You have other things on your mind. We need sober, high-functioning brain computers. So that young lady at the beginning, she said, man, I take a 350-page book, you give me 2 hours, and boop, I done read the whole thing. That is a sober, high-functioning brain computer. We need more of that. Protect your brain computer. That's it. Creator. Reminder, given what we read from the great late Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, told us about the ditties, told us about the songs, told us about the juvenile literature. Creator, remind us, stop saying not all white people are racist. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.